And now I'd like to ask Julie Ann Richards to tell us about climate damages tax. Julie is an advisor to Climate Damages Tax Coalition. There are working mics here, or you can use this one. Is that working? Is it on? Now it's working.
Now it's working. Yes, great. Thank you very much for the invite, Benito, and thank you very much to the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but the capacity building body. Appreciate being here today, and thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to cover, I guess many of the presentations have been quite complementary because they've dealt with different areas. So we've heard about adaptation this morning, climate bonds, which are perhaps most relevant for mitigation. And I'm going to deal with how we might raise funds for loss and damage. As I'm sure you're all aware, loss and damage is the most sticky issue that we face in the climate negotiations, one of the more challenging political issues. But I've got the answer. You'll be convinced in 10 minutes' time that it doesn't have to be so politically difficult. There's ways to make it much easier than we have been. Hopefully, I'm going to present them to you. So first of all, loss and damage, I'm sure you're all aware, but is essentially when the impacts of climate change go beyond what is possible to adapt to. So we being the parties, agreed at Paris that loss and damage was important enough to give its own article to, Article 8 of the Paris Agreement. Loss and damage came out from under adaptation and now sits alongside adaptation, recognising that developing countries face the need to both transform their economies through mitigation, the need to undertake significant adaptation action, and despite having done all of those things, are currently facing and will still face loss and damage from climate change. So impacts that it's not possible to adapt to. And there's the challenge with loss and damage is that it's big. So we already know that adaptation is going to be significant. Estimates vary, but let's just pick one, which is that adaptation finance needs might be $100 billion per year. That's international finance support needs. The estimates of loss and damage vary as well, but if we pick one, a fairly low one, the estimates are that loss and damage international finance needs by 2030 will be $300 billion per year. So we're talking 3 times as much. So the estimates of how much loss and damage is going to cost versus how much adaptation is going to cost is from either double or triple or quadruple, which gives you a sense of the scale that we're talking about. So I agree with Sean, the previous speaker, when he says that we can't mess around here. We need to think at scale. And so the solution I'm going to present is one that is at scale. It's definitely not the only solution we're going to need, but it's at scale. Okay. And the advantage of this solution to loss and damage is that it actually gets at the heart of the problem of climate change as well. So the enormous elephant in the room of the climate negotiations is that we rarely talk about the thing actually causing climate change. The words fossil fuel, coal, oil, and gas are not in the UNFCCC, they're not in the Kyoto Protocol, and they're not in the Paris Agreement. We don't talk in here about when we're going to phase out coal, when we're going to stop using oil. We talk about very esoteric things called emissions. Yet, unless we kind of face up to the fact that we have to stop using coal and oil and gas, we're not going to fix this problem. So we need to take some steps to do that. And we need to acknowledge that the fossil fuel industry are the reason that we don't talk about them. They've spent billions of dollars convincing us that it's someone else's problem. Someone else should do something about this, not us. That is, me speaking as the fossil fuel industry. I'm sure they'd accept me as a spokesperson. And they've spent, a lot of effort and a lot of money distracting us from solutions that exist in other fields as well. So if you look outside climate change, and you look to other areas, e.g. asbestos, e.g. nuclear, which was mentioned earlier in a different context, e.g. tobacco, e.g. oil spills, we have solutions that we can take from those other fields and apply in the realm of climate change that will help us both fix climate change and address the enormous loss and damage that is currently and will be faced in the future. So the important thing is to make the industry that's caused this problem responsible for 70% of emissions, responsible for the fact that we have not talked about them, and that they have lobbied politicians to ensure that we take no action, pay for the damage that their product is causing, which is how it works in other fields. Why are we not doing this in climate change? So our proposal is what we call the climate damages tax. It's a tax on the fossil fuel industry. It's a tax when oil, coal and gas are extracted, which would be paid into an international loss and damage solidarity facility, which is what we're calling it, which is what we're calling it from Monday. You're getting a special sneak preview into our report, which will be launched on Monday. We propose that it start at a fairly low price, $5 a tonne of CO2e. Even the EU ETS is higher than that, but that it increased quite dramatically. So it increased by $5 every year until 2030, after which point it increased at $10 every year. So it's on, the price starts low, but is on quite an escalator. We also propose a sliding scale for equity. So our proposal is that this be a global price so that no one can complain that we're messing with the international market for fossil fuels. Their extraction of fossil fuels won't be put at an advantage or disadvantage versus anyone else's. But if you're a rich country, if you're the UK, and you're extracting oil from the North Sea, 50% of the revenue that would come from that, the climate damages tax on that oil, would go to the International Loss and Damage Solidarity Facility, and 50% would go to the UK for them to use for fair transition purposes. So this comes back to the question that was asked earlier about the yellow vests. I don't think that man's in the room anymore. But that fair transition funds would assist to ensure that the transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a fossil-free economy is fair. It would help low-income communities get carbon-free jobs, transport and energy, and help them to avoid the climate damages tax, any pass-through that might occur. On the other end of our sliding scale for equity, if you are Sudan or South Sudan and you're extracting oil, all of the revenue that's generated from the climate damages tax would be available for use for Sudan or South Sudan for climate purposes. So it's global, yet it's fair. And there's obviously a sliding scale between the two. So there's significant, this might be a little bit hard for you to read, but there's significant potential, even if we're talking about starting at quite low levels of tax, for significant potential for revenue to be raised. So the blue line is how much money would be raised for loss and damage. You know, it starts at about $50 billion a year, goes up and remains at roughly $300 billion a year, which is the level of finance that I mentioned earlier we needed for loss and damage. And you can see the fair transition, which is the red bars, is significantly higher, and that would be used domestically, as I said, for fair transition purposes. We have, I won't go over this, but we have, in the report that we'll be releasing on Monday, we have outlined how it might work. We propose that the GCF establish a second trust fund separate to its current work. That would be the Loss and Damage Solidarity Facility. that the money be paid directly into this fund. I think earlier I think Benito made what I would call the very rash statement earlier that a global tax can't happen. It already exists. The International Oil Pollution Compensation Fund, the IOPC, is a global tax. It already exists. It runs the way we're proposing this run. Only our proposal is clearly superior. And there are other examples of global similar. There are other examples which you could see as kind of global taxes as well. Within the EU, there's a regional tax. There's also some examples of other regional opt-in taxes as well. So it exists. We're not proposing anything that's vastly different from what's out there already in other fields. It's just that we, in climate change, have been so blinkered, we have missed the opportunity to look at how it works elsewhere. So we propose, as I said, that the money primarily the loss and damage finance go to the GCF, that the GCF should distribute those funds in a couple of ways. One, there should be some kind of facility for countries that face sudden onset extreme event disasters. So essentially, if Dominica faced another Hurricane Maria, wiped out their whole economy, had urgent need for funds, they could go to special facility that would be run by the GCF staff with clear guidance about how it would work to be able to get instant money. The GCF should also work with the Adaptation Fund, the Least Developed Country Fund, and the Special Climate Change Fund in order to channel small amounts of money to both countries and communities. And countries should have, essentially countries should be the ones deciding how this money would be spent, what constitutes a good loss and damage program to spend this money on, and they should do that in conjunction with the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which would give guidance as to how it would all work. So the bodies that we need are already there, and all the nitty-gritty detail is contained in our report, which is out on Monday. I think it'll be available on our website from about noon, but we're launching it at 6:30 p.m. With some excellent speakers at Press Room Katowice, so please do feel free to join us. Open to any questions.